Welcome to the October edition of The Coffee House, where in the next hour, there's a referendum on the November ballot to ban handguns in Takoma Park. But is a local gun ban legal? That's on Coffee House Forum. Biogenetically engineered food. You might not taste the difference, but is it a danger to you? We'll take a look on In Sickness and in Health. Then journey to the swamps of Louisiana with Squeeze Bayou on musical traditions. And award-winning short story writer Reginald McKnight discusses his new collection, White Boys, on Writer's Block. Plus, a Kim Roberts poem, the song and dance calendar, and the top 10 lists for book sales and video rentals. Hi, and welcome to the Coffee House. Columbine, Jonesboro, Atlanta, Fort Worth, places of worship, community centers, schools, no place seems immune to gun violence these days. Blame parents, blame Hollywood. There's plenty of blame to go around. Of course, don't forget the gun lobby. We are a country with more guns than people. Who can honestly profess surprise when some of these weapons are put to tragic use? Public opinion polls show substantial support for tougher gun laws. In Virginia, Democratic legislators in the Washington suburbs are pressing for a state law banning guns on school property. In Maryland, Governor Paris Glendening plans to seek legislation permitting only so-called smart guns to be sold in the state, guns that can be fired by their owners and owners alone. Meanwhile, some gun manufacturers are reportedly offering to install safety improvements and distribution controls over their guns if cities around the country agree to stop suing the gun makers. In Takoma Park, petitioners collected nearly 2,500 signatures from registered voters, enough to qualify a referendum for the November 2nd ballot that would go well beyond current Maryland gun control laws, and even the governor's smart gun proposal. By its terms, the Takoma referendum would prohibit the sale, possession, or ownership of handguns in the city. Par for the course in nuclear-free, pacifistic Takoma Park, right? Well, why then did mild-mannered piano teacher John Guernsey feel a need to picket prior to the city council meeting on the evening of September 13th?
We want to ensure that the city council doesn't vote tonight to get a court injunction to keep our lawful petition off the ballots, so that the petition, as you know, bans is a choice, a referendum on handguns, and my understanding was that the city council was going to vote unanimously to get a court injunction.
The Takoma Park City Council blocking a gun control law? That morning's Washington Post account of the controversy portrayed a city deeply riven over the gun ban referendum. So that evening, the electronic news media hovered in anticipation of a bloodletting at the city council meeting. What they got instead was a bloodless legal briefing by the city's attorney on something called preemption.
The state law basically couldn't be more explicit. It says explicitly that no municipality can pass such a law, can regulate this way. It's very explicit. It is not at all subject to interpretation. It's not gray, it's not pink, it's not purple. It's just black and white.
While state law does allow local communities to pass gun laws regarding minors in certain public spaces, like schools, playgrounds, and churches, the city attorney noted that the gun ban referendum language made no reference to any of these exceptions, and the city council could not tamper with the language of the referendum in order to save it. That would violate the city's charter. So council members were in a legal vise. They were duty-bound by the city charter to vote to place the referendum on the November 2nd ballot. But if they did so, they could be violating their oaths to uphold state law. And that led Councilmember Lisa Hawkins to say that she'd likely vote against putting the referendum on the ballot. Even if, or maybe especially if, the referendum were legally doomed, the council still wanted to honor the petitioners' efforts and make a statement about handguns. They settled on two advisory ballot questions. First, should Maryland's law preempting local communities from enacting tougher handgun laws be repealed? And if it's repealed, should Takoma Park then outright ban handguns within the city?
My interests are a couple-fold in this. One is I was concerned about handing an easy victory to the gun lobby in one of two ways. The first way is that the issue could be taken off the ballot by a judge prior to the election, in which case it would be seen as a defeat for efforts to regulate guns and a victory for those who don't think guns should be regulated. The second defeat I thought would be potentially more serious, and that would be that if this issue is on the ballot and if sufficient numbers of citizens of Takoma Park realize this is illegal, and if they realize that it jeopardizes the city and puts us in a position where we may wind up in court and where we will certainly lose in court, that people may vote against the proposed ballot question. And then what turns out, on the one hand, would have been a judicial decision becomes the rejection of gun legislation by the voters of Takoma Park. And few people in the press or in the NRA are going to take the time to distinguish the people who were voting against something which was illegal. What the gun lobby will do is say the citizens of Takoma Park rejected legislation that would have permitted the regulation of guns.
For a handful of gun advocates attending the council proceedings, even the merely advisory ballot questions went too far. As for referendum supporters, they praised council's efforts, but they still wanted their measure to ban handguns to appear on the ballot. And maybe, they suggested, with some creative lawyering, the referendum could be saved from preemption.
Any great constitutional right has come about only because people push the envelope. Analogously, let's look at a case, or let's look at the right to choose. There was no right to choose 50 years ago. Women had no right to their own bodies. Over a period of time it evolved because people pushed the envelope, going back to Griswold v. Connecticut and other cases which corporate counsel certainly can attest to. Bit by bit, incrementally, it pushed it, and it kept pushing it until finally there was the right to choose. But it's not written in the Constitution. It evolved over brave people willing to go out and risk themselves, risk their political futures, risk their legal futures to do something like that.
Attorney Mooney, a former state legislator, suggested that the referendum was possibly legal under the state law provision letting local governments regulate guns as regards minors. The council decided to table the referendum question for 8 days. They asked that during this time, the city's attorney, the counsel for the petitioners, and a handful of others interested in the issue meet to see if there was some possible way to salvage the referendum. At that meeting, City Attorney Sue Silber proposed an alternative interpretation of the referendum language, one that would not violate state law. She read the first sentence as non-binding legally, merely an exhortation to the council to control guns. The meat, she suggested, is the second sentence, which requires the council to take appropriate action. And appropriate action presumably means action that is effective but also legal. Tom Mooney said that approach worked for him, and that worked for Ward 4 council member Lisa Hawkins too. She explained her change of heart at the council meeting on September 21st.
I feel there's a way to interpret this that's not in direct violation of state law. I'm not sure if that argument will survive a challenge in court, but the most important thing in my decision-making process is that it could go before a judge and might survive a challenge in court. If you take that and you kind of look at it in terms of my other responsibility as an elected official to honor the democratic process and to honor the needs of my constituents and desires, I've decided to change my vote and vote to put it on the charge.
Mayor Cathy Porter announced she would vote to put the referendum on the ballot, and the remaining council members followed suit. Several citizens warned that the referendum language was sure to be challenged in court, either before the vote or, if it passes, after, and that would force the city to devote tens of thousands of sorely needed dollars to a losing legal cause. Indeed, the city's attorney earlier had warned that the city's insurance policy might not cover the costs of defending such a suit. But the general sentiment in the chamber seemed to be that the council did the right thing, respecting the city's traditions and the democratic process.
A lot of people worked hard on this, And I think you're not only saying yes to a democratic process, you're saying yes to Takoma Park as a unified community, standing up and joining with other communities across the country at a very ripe moment when this issue, I mean, every day, every single day now we're waking up to seeing violence. Tremendous. You know, it's shocking, and it's very uplifting to see our town come together after a bit of a struggle and join. I have been called in the last week, based on the press coverage from people in Colorado, California, and New York, saying, thank you for doing this. We want to do the same thing. How are you doing it? And it's time to challenge the NRA and these bad preemptive state laws. So I just thank you very much for going on record.
All right, I call the vote on this resolution. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The resolution passes unanimously.
Now it's up to the voters, unless, of course, the referendum is enjoined before the November 2nd election. And even if it is, voters can still register their views on whether state law should preempt tough local gun laws, and if not, whether Takoma Park should totally ban the sale, ownership, and possession of handguns. Still to come, better dining through biotechnology, the Cajun sounds of Squeeze Bayou, award-winning short story author Reginald McKnight, top 10 lists and the song and dance calendar, but first...
Lying out under the night sky until even my teeth were cold, and you oblivious to all save those clusters of stars moving slowly on their great wheel and singing in contrapuntal harmony, if we were clever enough to hear, to the melody of the planets. Teeth can't feel cold, you said, naming each new cluster. Richard Nixon, you said, and pointed until I could see the broad forehead, the ski slope nose. 1958 Cadillac with fins, the constellation Frigidaire. I pulled closer for warmth, but you weren't giving any away. You loved instead the feel of the words as they formed in your mouth, fisted words, words taut as wire. I stopped hearing, and after a while the stars stopped forming high-rise apartments, actresses, the shape of Tennessee, and became just teeth, not sensitive the way I knew them, but teeth as you had described, inert stones in the mouth.
Hi, and welcome to In Sickness and in Health at the Coffee House. You are what you eat, at least so the saying goes. If so, the odds are that you're now part biogenetically engineered crop. Don't bother looking in the mirror, but you might want to take a second look in your shopping cart. Many popular foods, from pasta sauce to baked goods to cereal, even baby formula, may contain genes from another species. So a soy plant may contain a Brazil nut gene, a strawberry may contain a fish gene. Does it matter? Let's take a look at what some local shoppers think.
I've tried the Campbell's products, as the tuna fish, the Old El Paso, the crackers.
Were you aware that they contain genetically modified crops?
No, I didn't know what you're even saying.
The genes have been altered?
Oh, no, I'm not aware of that. No, I'm not aware.
Do you mind that they contain genetically modified crops?
Not really.
You would not eat anything that has genetically modified crops?
Definitely not.
Were you aware that they contain genetically modified crops?
No.
Does it matter to you that they do?
No. really doesn't.
Are you worried about any health implications?
Never been worried about health at all.
Excuse me, ma'am, do you purchase any of these products?
Just about all of them, actually.
Were you aware that they contain genetically modified crops?
No, I wasn't.
Does it bother you that they do?
Yes.
In what way?
Well, I'm worried about what that does to you over time. If you know, when you eat it over time, what it does to you. How it affects your health.
Are you going to stop eating them now?
Yes. Are they labeled as such?
No,
they're not.
Would you like to see a label?
I would. Yes, indeed. Because then you could know what's in them and you could know what to avoid if you choose to avoid it.
Have you ever tried any of these food products?
Yes.
Were you aware that they all contain genetically modified crops?
Some of them, probably. Yeah.
Does it bother you?
Yes.
Genetically modified products have come to permeate the marketplace since their introduction just 5 years ago. Many farmers contend bioengineering increases output, it makes for hardier crops, and it has no effect on taste. And the biotech industry claims these designer crops are safe. But are they? Here to answer that question are Charlotte Arnold, Policy Director at the Center for Food Safety in Washington, D.C., and Patrick Kelly, Director of State Government Relations at the Biotech Industry Organization in D.C. as well. Welcome both of you to the Coffee House.
Thank you.
There are about 34 genetically modified crops approved now in the U.S. and many thousands in development. Can you say what some of the most common ones available today are? Perhaps you'd like to begin?
Some of the most common crops, food crops, are corn, tomatoes, there's a papaya on the market, squash. So it runs the gamut of food crops.
And what are some of the ones in development that you've heard about?
There are a host. Almost every food crop you can imagine has some potential to be genetically improved at some point in the future. And again, it's over 300 and probably adding to that list daily.
Is it correct that about 25% of the U.S. crop last year, of the corn crop, was genetically modified?
It's 25 to 30%.
And even more of soy.
Yes.
40 to 50% of the soy planted was genetically modified.
Now, these kinds of foods have got much more attention in the UK and other European countries than they have in the US. There's words like Frankenstein food being tossed around in Britain, and some countries have even banned planting them altogether. Why do you think that the US is so tame in comparison?
Well, I think a lot of people put faith in the Food and Drug Administration here in this country that is in charge of reviewing and basically assuring public safety of all the food products in this country. And we have the safest, most efficient food supply in the world. And I think a lot of people put faith in the FDA, and the FDA is very stringent in their regulation of this technology.
Actually, I'd like to correct a common misperception about, there's a common misperception that the American consumer doesn't care whether their foods are genetically engineered or whether they should be labeled, and that's quite simply not true. Through our lawsuit against the FDA for its genetically engineered foods policy, we obtained 44,000 pages of agency records, and some of the things we learned in there, we learned that only less than 2% of the people who commented on the policy approve of what the FDA did, and 80% of the people commenting wanted labeling.
So your issue is get this labeled, whether or not it's safe for consumers to eat. They're assuming that we have to have the right to see on the label.
Right. We do not believe that they're safe, but we think that even if they should be proven safe, consumers have the right to know. People ought to be able to say, I do or don't want this in my diet. Foods are labeled, for example, Kix is labeled, the child cereal, to say that it has yellow food dye. if we're told that, why can't we be told that there are human growth genes in our pork products?
We'll come back to the labeling issue. It's a very hot topic, obviously, in a minute. There's all kinds of environmental issues involved in genetically changing plants, and for years we've had new plants introduced, broccoli and kale all come from the same root, and cauliflower. But it seems to be different when you introduce a gene from a different species. And focusing on the health issues, I believe the main one to hit the headlines recently has been the allergies. The FDA does insist on testing for certain common allergens.
Right.
That maybe covers 90% of allergies typical in the US, but what about the other 10? Do you remember the story about Patrick, perhaps, about the Brazil nut gene that was introduced?
And actually, to comment on that story, there was a company that manufactured or genetically manipulated a soy product to contain a trait that was common in Brazil nuts. That it was some agronomy benefit. I don't think it had anything to do with the nutritional value of the soy. But they did incorporate this Brazil nut gene. They submitted their application to the FDA, said that, through their due diligence, found out that yes, indeed, that the soy gene that they incorporate, or the Brazil nut gene that they incorporated, did actually trigger allergenicity in the product, and the product was immediately scrapped. That's the process at work, and the company has no interest in developing a product that is going to hurt or harm people. That's the problem.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but that's a voluntary process, and the simple fact is that there's a big difference between a mandatory process and a voluntary process, and thank goodness that this company did go to the FDA. But the law dictates that these companies should be required by the FDA to conduct pre-market safety testing and label these foods. So, but for that company doing that, we would have the chance of severe allergic reactions. And, there are now tomatoes with flounder genes on the market, and fish is a well-known allergen, but the tomatoes aren't labeled. So people aren't going to know. If I were a person allergic to fish, there's no way when I go into the market that I could look at one tomato over another and say, oh, this one's got fish genes in it. And the other issue is the FDA's own scientists have said that in creating these genetically engineered foods, there can be new allergens that develop.
Yes, this is an unknown. With such new products, 5 years that have been around, how do we know health implications? I mean, could they cause cancer? Could they cause autoimmune diseases? How do we really know? There's been a lot of errors over time with introducing perhaps new species into different countries and that go awry and cause a great deal of environmental and damage.
Well, any new food product, whether it's genetically engineered or conventionally grown, that is new to a market or new to a specific product, may have downrange effects that are unforeseen at the time. And again, this technology is the most stringently regulated technology currently, at least at the food level. The Food and Drug Administration and the United States Department of Agriculture is incredibly under focus now, and they're very concerned about what the long-term ramifications of the food are.
Okay, apart from allergies, I'd like to move on to chemicals, because a lot of these crops apparently don't need as much spray, or they're resistant to herbicides. So the argument is that farmers will use less. They'll just use it sparingly at the weeds around. But I think so far they've studied they've found that this is very mixed, because some farmers think, oh well, my plant's not going to die, and they just spray all over the place, and the plant will absorb some of these chemicals.
Actually, there are two new studies out. One of them which shows that monarch butterfly larvae that eat Bt corn pollen are found to die more quickly than larvae that eat regular corn pollen. The other interesting thing is there are new studies out which say that the buffer zones, which were planted they plant a non-GMO crop in between conventional crop and a BT crop, for example, and they found that those buffer zones are not as effective as they had hoped. We're into our 4th planting season with BT crops, and the chance of BT resistance developing is within the next 5 years.
BT is the
I'm sorry,
resistant.
BT is, yes. It's an organic pesticide that has since been incorporated into corn crops and various other crops.
Can I ask whether there is a concern in the industry about this spreading and creating super weeds or super
Well,
bugs?
resistance management is a very real concern for the agribusiness industry right now, and the organics industry uses Bt, Bacillus thuringiensis, as it's a naturally occurring pesticide. They use it on all their crops, so there's just as much likelihood that a product is going to develop resistance due to an organic farmer spreading it on his crops as to a farmer. Granted, the acreage is bigger, but somebody using genetically
Okay,
modified
very
crops.
quickly, because we're running out of time here. What about the nutritional content? Are these new crops more nutritious, higher in protein, or is that's not one of the goals of them? It's to make them survive
not yet.
better.
The crops on the market right now were basically engineered to improve agronomy outcomes. They're to either increase yield or reduce the dependence on pesticides. There are the 300 products that are in the pipeline now. There will be some added nutrition, some vaccines that will be derived through these products to
vaccines.
Third world.
Yeah, that's an interesting element of it.
I want to address one thing you said about nutritional content. The FDA records show that nutritional content is degraded with these foods. And in fact, I read some of your position papers from your organization, and they say that if nutritional content is changed, those foods should be labeled. And so
we're just about out of time here. Just a quick question. You want labeling on all of these products. What about you?
Well, it's the labeling. If there's a real and necessary reason to label a
What's
product,
the harm in putting it on everything?
well, it's going to be perceived as a warning label.
Okay, we have run out of time now, I'm afraid. A very big thank you to Charlotte Arnold of the Center for Food Safety and Patrick Kelly of the Biotechnology Industry Association for sharing their views on the brave new world of biotech crops. I'm Cathy Kristiansen, and this has been In Sickness and in Health.
Still to come, Writer's Block, the top 10 lists, and now...
that was great. Thank you.
Thank you, David.
I'd like to welcome the band Squeeze Bayou to the musical tradition segment of Takoma Coffee House, the award-winning musical Squeeze Bayou band. And what award was it?
It was the Le Prix d'Ordonneux that the Cajun French Music Association presented to us.
And that was the 1998.
Right, for the best recording by a Cajun band outside of Louisiana.
And certainly that makes you the best Cajun band in Montgomery County, Maryland.
Oh, at least.
Okay.
We like to say we were the best in the world outside of Louisiana.
Yeah, that works. That works. Although there's an Eskimo band. Well, no, that's right. The CD froze on the way down. What about if I want more Cajun music, and I'm going to go now onto the web, where do I look?
Well, if you do a search on Cajun and Zydeco, you'll come up with Gary Heyman's website, and Gary's got a very extensive website with local listings, national listings.
Listings is his life, basically.
Right.
Okay, and so that I can plug in anywhere and pretty much find out where, if I'm going out to Colorado, I can find out.
Right. What's going on in Colorado?
Why do you think Cajun music is always seemingly hotter and hotter on the upsweep, and what's happened in the last 5 years or so?
Well, in this area, there's a very large Cajun Zydeco dance scene that has built up. It's fun music. It's fun to go dance, and it's social dancing, couple dancing.
Okay. What was the name of the tune that you just played?
Jonglement, which means think of me.
And you took Spanish in high school?
Un poco.
How about giving us another one? But tell us what the name of that one is.
Okay, the next one is a waltz, and it's called the Reno Waltz.
Okay, take it away. feel better now. I was waltzing around. Now we put, some of you out there probably heard the feedback in there. Now we did that deliberately so you knew that this band was not like Milli Vanilli doing lip sync. We were creating we were creating that Roadhouse effect. Where do you guys play mostly?
We mostly play for dances, so we play out at Glen Echo Park, Cherry Hill Park. I guess those are two of the main
A lot
places.
of times there'll be workshops ahead of time.
That's right. Usually there's a dance workshop, so
Yeah.
you can come out and learn how to do the two-step.
Right, and basically there's a two-step and then there's a waltz, a Cajun waltz, and that's
Those are the two main
it just
dances.
varies
That's it. We
back and
alternate
forth.
them.
And nobody's really keeping score. I mean, you kind of just go out there and dance, and if you don't do it right, you still have a good time.
That's right.
And the workshops are generally about an hour, 45 minutes before. I want to mention the CD. I even think I've got the name right. I heard some guy once come on and introduce it as Steppin' Out, but I know that it's Steppin' Fast.
Right.
And here it is. And I guess tunes on this are what won you that award.
That's right. This
And,
is what we received the award for.
Why don't you give out your phone number, because I was looking at the liner notes and it mentions band bookings. And somebody out there may say, how can we get in touch with this band? Go
Okay.
ahead. Shameless
Sure.
seduction.
It's 301-270-2586.
Okay, that's 301-270-2586. Operators are standing by. While those operators are standing by, though, you got to take us home with one tune. What's it going to be?
Okay, we're going to close it out with a Chico two-step.
Does that happen to be on here?
No.
So that people should be recording this to get the complete Squeeze By You. Thank you, Karen.